Imagine surviving a plane crash, only to wake up surrounded by mountains so enormous that you can't see a single road, town, or person anywhere. You're thousands of meters above sea level. The temperature is dropping. Your food is running out. And somewhere beyond those mountains is the only thing that can save you. Civilization. For 16 people, this wasn't a nightmare. It was reality. They would spend 72 days trapped in the Andes. But here's what makes their story extraordinary. The crash wasn't the hardest part. It was October 13th, 1972. Uruguayan Air Force, Flight 571, was carrying 45 people, including members of a rugby team, their families, and friends. They were flying toward Chile when the aircraft entered the Andes. The pilots believed they had cleared the mountains. They hadn't. The aircraft struck the mountainside and broke apart. When the survivors finally understood what had happened, they were stranded at more than 3,000 meters above sea level. There were no roads, no buildings, no nearby towns, just endless white peaks in every direction. And the survivors believed something else. Rescuers would come. Surely, someone was looking for them. At first, they waited. They turned the broken fuselage into a shelter. They used whatever clothing and materials they could find to protect themselves from the cold. And they rationed the little food that remained. Every distant sound of an aircraft brought hope. Maybe this was it. Maybe rescue had finally arrived. But the aircraft kept disappearing into the distance. One day became several. Several became more than a week. And then the survivors discovered something terrifying. The search had been called off. The outside world believed they were gone. The people waiting for them had stopped looking. And the survivors didn't have enough food to simply sit there and wait. Then, the mountain attacked again. An avalanche swept through the area where they were sheltering. The survivors, who had already been struggling to endure the cold, were suddenly trapped beneath the snow. When they emerged, their situation had become even more desperate. The wreckage was still their shelter. The mountains were still surrounding them, and their supplies were disappearing. But they organized themselves. They shared what little they had. They cared for those who were injured. They searched for ways to stay warm. And somehow, amid all that uncertainty, they maintained something incredibly important. They stayed together. But eventually, they reached a point where staying together at the wreckage wasn't enough. They needed help, and help wasn't coming. Someone would have to leave. Not for a few hours. Not for a short walk. They would have to cross the Andes and find civilization. The problem? They didn't know exactly where they were. They didn't know how far they had to travel, and they had no guarantee that the mountains ahead would lead anywhere. Still, a small group prepared to make the journey. They carried what they could. Then they stepped away from the wreckage. One step, then another. The people they left behind could only watch them disappear into the mountains. Because if the journey failed, there might be no one left to bring help. The journey was brutal. They climbed through freezing conditions. They crossed enormous stretches of snow and ice, and every time they reached what looked like the end of the mountains, another peak appeared. Imagine walking for days without seeing a road. No houses, no vehicles, no people, just mountain after mountain, and still having to tell yourself, keep moving. Because behind you are people waiting for you to return, and ahead, you have no idea what you'll find. Then, after days of walking, something finally changed. They saw signs that civilization wasn't as far away as they had feared. And then came the moment they had been waiting for. They encountered a Chilean muleteer named Sergio Catalan. The survivors had finally found someone who could get their message to the outside world. They were alive. After 72 days in the Andes, the survivors were finally rescued. 16 people had survived. 16 people who had boarded a plane expecting an ordinary journey, had endured one of the most extraordinary survival ordeals in modern history. They had lost friends. They had endured extreme cold and isolation. They had watched hope disappear, but they found a reason to keep moving. The Andes didn't give them an easy way out. There was no road waiting for them. No rescue team appearing at the perfect moment. There was only one decision after another. Wait, or move. Give up, or take another step. And sometimes survival isn't about knowing exactly how you're going to make it. Sometimes, it's simply refusing to stop moving forward. If you had been trapped in those mountains, would you have had the courage to leave the wreckage and search for help? Tell me what you think in the comments.